Hey, it's Andrew, and today on the show we have Guillaume Cabane, also known as G. G was the former VP of Growth at hypergrowth startups such as Drift and Segment, and now works as a growth advisor for a number of different startups. In this episode, we talk about forecasting churn, the most surprising factor G found that contributes to churn, and the simplest way to battle it. We also discuss tracking and measuring your marketing efforts, the importance of understanding the sales velocity of your different marketing channels, and why you shouldn't give up too quickly on a new marketing channel. G also shared the craziest thing he had ever done with automation and emphasized how a slight advantage over your competitors can make a world of difference in the SaaS business world. As usual, I'm excited to hear what you think of this episode, and if you have any feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can email me directly on andrew@churn.fm. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, and enjoy the episode.
How do you build a habit-forming product?
You need to invest.
And we saw these different...
You don't just gun for revenue in the door.
This is CHURN.fm, the podcast for subscription economy pros. Each week, we hear how the world's fastest growing companies are tackling churn and using retention to fuel their growth.
How do you build a habit-forming product?
We crossed over that magic threshold to negative churn.
You need to invest in customer success.
It always comes down to retention and engagement.
Completely bootstrap, profitable and growing.
Strategies, tactics, and ideas brought together to help your business thrive in the subscription economy. I'm your host, Andrew Michael, and here's today's episode. Hey G, welcome to the show.
Hey Andrew, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you today, G. For the listeners out there, G is a growth advisor to companies like Hell, MonkeyLearn, MadKudu, and others. He was also the ex-VP of growth at Drift and Segment, and earlier on in his career, he was head of marketing at Mention. So he's also been focused in B2B SaaS for over 10 years now, and he's had a lot of time to think about the problem of churn and retention and its effects on growth. G, throughout your career, what would you say has been the biggest light bulb moment that you've had when you just sort of stood back and went like, oh?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been doing marketing for the past 15 years, actually 17 now. Started at Apple in 2003. So yeah, it's been 17 years now. And I've always been doing marketing, thinking of acquisition and thinking of bringing people in. And then, I do B2B, which means as salespeople. And so I hand off my leads, I hand off my demand generation efforts to salespeople, and then I move on, right? And in 2014, 2015, when I joined Mention, there was no one to take care of the clients once they became clients. And the churn was pretty bad. And I had to take care of it because there's just no one else, right? It was a small company. And when I started looking into that and looking and trying to understand why people left, I think that was a light bulb moment, both for my interest in full life cycle of the clients and also for technical marketing, which became growth, right? Because a lot of the things that growth does, around automation and lots of scrappiness is mostly to reduce costs, to do things automatically that humans could do but are too expensive to do, and are very applicable to small companies because you just don't have the human resources, right? And so if you want to take care of thousands of customers at scale, you need to do things smarter. And I think that was the moment for me, 2014, 2015.
Absolutely. Definitely, it's interesting that you say that there was nobody else to do it and you needed to solve this problem. Sort of realizing as well that part of that problem is through the acquisition and the leads that you bring in. And that's
it's because we had a revenue goal. And so I was in charge of all of the revenue. And so it's very, as soon as you're in charge of all the revenue, there's no hiding that if you bring bad leads, it's your problem too.
Absolutely. And also at the end of the day, your biggest lever for growth is really focusing on having good retention, because when you're in a subscription business, you really want to see if you can increase that LTV going forward. So talking about this as well, because we just had a chat just before the show, and we had this discussion that really when churn is bad, the place you really should be looking at first is your marketers, because at the end of the day, like it often like we start to look at sales team or customer success and say, okay, it's their fault, but really like the problem starts earlier. But what are your thoughts on this, and like what are some of the things that you've discovered like throughout your career that leads?
Yeah, I think if we take a step back, one of the significant issues is the KPIs. Is like, what is the incentive of the marketing team? How are we measuring their effort and their impact? Now, I'm a marketer, and so I have the habit of saying, if you give me any metric but retained revenue like LTV, I can cheat, right? I can push people to sign up. No worries. If I overpromise, it's super easy. Like, you give me the hands on like paid acquisition or SEO, I'm going to put out some ads saying that the product is free forever and that is going to do wonders, and people are going to sign up. And of course, they're going to be unhappy, and so they're going to churn, right? But bring people in, if you can do whatever you want, is easy. And of course, most marketers don't go that far, but there is an incentive to overpromise, right? So the first thing you got to think about in the business is, what is the incentive of my marketers, of my demand generation team, and is that incentive aligned with the health of the business long term? It's number one, let's say. And the second is, do they have the data to understand what's a good customer and what's not a great customer? And it's not your customer's fault. It's your fault, really, right? Because you brought the people in, right? And even if you have organic on stuff, that says, oh, I have so many companies I advise that tell me, oh yeah, I've got lots of traffic on this blog post, but most of the traffic is not relevant.
Yep.
And then the answer is obvious. Change the article, right? If the traffic is not relevant to your business, like, you shouldn't, it's not just like null value. It's actually destroying value, because it's taking time of your business to take care of those people and say no. It's taking their time, and they'll be frustrated. So you're actually destroying value, right? There's no null game here. You're either adding value or destroying value, right? And so you got to be very thoughtful about that.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of those vanity metrics as well. It's like you see traffic, it's exciting, but if it's not bringing results, it's meaningless at the end of the day. Yeah. So you mentioned something as well, like, which is key, and I think it's definitely an area of your expertise, is being able to track and understand the effectiveness and having access to the data. So I think, like, for me personally, as a marketer, I think the holy grail is really being able to attribute LTV back to sort of your different acquisition channels, and really understanding the long-term value, like the lifetime value that you're getting from your customers as a result of the different efforts. Like, how have you seen this done successful, and like, what is some of your advice when companies are thinking about going about tracking and measuring their marketing efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it really, I would split in two buckets, different types of company. If you've been in business for like some time, let's call it like a couple of years, right? Let's say like twice the average length of your lifetime of your customer, right? If your business has been there for twice the average length, then you can start doing some really good regression by channel on LTV. You can really start saying, hey, like, people who come from SEO have like, I don't know, like a $500 LTV. People who come in from like outbound might have like a $2,000 LTV, right? The conversion rates, the top of the funnel, like the ACV, the retention in months and whatnot, right? And that's pretty great, which means if you have that, you can start like having those regressions and apply those predictive models to new customers, and you can apply that to your decisions. So you can say, hey, like next month, well, now I know that that people from this channel have a high conversion rate, but eventually they drop off, and so the LTV is lower. And so I don't want to focus on them, right? And I do a lot of that in my day-to-day work. In my day-to-day work, I do a lot of that. And so we start like, we stop the efforts on high churn channels. The other bucket, obviously, is you don't have enough business history, right?
Yeah.
That's harder because like it's really like churn is something that's really hard to predict. And I see a lot of businesses like saying that they have like net negative churn and that growth is infinite. And when I look at the financial model, like they've got less than 1 year of selling. So, well, of course, people haven't churned yet, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not that your product is great; it's that people are new and like you're still in the love phase of the relationship,
Yeah.
right? So that gets harder. In that case, if I were you, I would try to grab churn data from podcasts or from other articles in your industry that are relevant, and add 50% to be pessimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like as well the add 50% to be pessimistic, because really
Yes.
like early days, everything is unknown. But
Yeah,
let's talk
because
about
churn always hurts you in a worse way than you think.
Yeah, and it's always one of those things as well that's often like an afterthought. It's like, as you say, like because you haven't hit that year mark, things don't look so bad yet. So it's almost masked in a way, but really underneath the curtains, like shit could really be hitting the fan without anybody paying attention.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's two types, and when you look at like predicting churn, there's the two types of like ways you can think about it. One, well, actually, let's actually break it down in three, right? Either you're doing a model where you're saying, hey, my average retention in months for this type of client at this ACV in this channel is like, let's call it like 8 months. And so you know that, or like 1 year, and you know that after that time, like your chances of churn is going to increase every month, right? And you can just model that. There's a curve, and you know that you're losing, like probably like 3% per month of users and maybe less in revenue, right? That's one way. The other way is to look at behavior and say, well, let's actually, within a cohort, let's look at the behavior of the clients. Are they using the product? Are they not using the product? And let's use that to model a churn behavior model to predict, are they engaged or are they gonna leave, right? And within that strategy, it's going to work for some product. It's not going to work from others. There are some products where like engagement gradually, I'd say, diminishes over time, and below a certain point, they're no longer getting the value to offset the cost, and so they leave, right? Some other products, especially mobile apps, the churn happens immediately, right? It's like the engagement was high, they switch to another app and you never see them again. And in that case, you can't predict, right? Well, you can't predict with behavior. You can't predict with time. It's just based on, hey, were they acquired by another better app, right? And so that churn, it can't be predicted by time. It cannot be predicted by behavior.
Definitely. And I think as well, like this is one thing that we've talked a little bit about on the podcast, is really about that window of churn. And for different companies, that definitely is a point. But what you tend to typically see is there's always that window, whether if it's maybe in the mobile app space or if it's in the SaaS space, where it's like the first 90 days are critical in understanding, and that's when you sort of need to be looking at the behavior. And most likely, like most businesses, if they're going to stick around after the 90 days, you tend to see this increased retention rate for the cohorts that make it past that period.
Yeah. And so I worked on actually predicting like surprising churn for B2B models, and we found out that a good part of the churn comes from people change in the organization, right? And the reason why that is that we have a CS team. You're going to work on the first 90 days. You're going to onboard the champion and then the people working with your champion, and it's going to be all in good. But like the other thing that we sell, like most of the listeners here sell like SaaS products, software, right? So and so what that means is that those people in tech, the average tenure, so length in a job, it's just like churn, right? They stay on average, in the Bay Area, it's 18 months. In the US, it's like 2 years, and like, but more or less, like people change like jobs every 2 to 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's faster in tech and it's faster in California. And so it just happens if you sell to someone who's already like 1 year in the job, like 6 months from now, the chances to leave are getting like increased by the month, right? When they leave, most of the time, two things happen. One, they're replaced, right? And someone else comes in with maybe other vendors that he or she likes, right? And then churn is like, it's hard to, let's say, to battle at that moment. And so I started with my team predicting that, looking at data insights to try and forecast, predict, and also combat the churn, right? One thing that we do that I can advise everyone, all the listeners here to do, super easy. If you have a SaaS product, it means you send emails, right? You send either product emails or marketing emails. Anyway, you send emails to your customers. Please monitor the hard bounces. You have an ESP like MailChimp or whatever, you use like Iterable or whatever ESP you like. There's a way to monitor for hard bounces. You use Zapier, take the hard bounces, you sync that back to your CRM, right? When there's like 1 or 2 hard bounces, I'm not just talking like a soft bounce, I'm talking about hard bounce, right?
Yeah.
You have your CS people look at the hard bounce. Most likely that person's gone. The email is the first thing that's it's either going to bounce or auto respond, right?
Yep.
That person's gone, right? That's a super easy and cheap trick, right? You know that person's gone? Great. Now you not need to work on who's the next person. Now your CS team's job is to find out, is there already a replacement? Who is the replacement? Can we get in touch with that person, right? First thing. Second thing that most teams forget, you just had a champion who left. What is that champion going to do? Is he or she going to like start becoming like a farmer and farming potatoes in the backyard? No, of course not, right? That person is going to stay in tech, right? And that person is most likely going to go in a similar role, right? And is most likely going to want to implement the similar successes that he or she had in the previous job, right? What should you do? You should find out where that person is going, right? Find out that person's personal email address and tell them, hey, what's next? Look on LinkedIn, look on Twitter, and all of that is automated in my case, right? And after we found the new job for that person, we send that person a gift in the first week in their new job, saying congrats for the new gig. You do. And if it's a promotion, well, a job promotion in the new company, we say, congrats for your new gig. You deserve it. It's great. Let us send you a small gift because we love you. We do not ask for anything. I don't ask for a demo. They're busy. It's their first week. I just send them a nice headset, a Bose headset, because at the price I sell stuff for a champion who already loves my product, I don't care, right? So I send that and say, hey, congrats. We love you. This is for you to focus. Let us know when you're ready to talk. And that's it. I preserve the relationship, right? And so they will bring me back on board, right? That is my best acquisition campaigns. People who leave jobs, go somewhere else, the conversion is insane. It's really, really good. And the reason for that is, I imagine there's a new, imagine I sell Gorgias, a help desk software. And so we sell it to like CS people, like VPs of CS. Imagine she goes into a new role. She's going to make a recommendation for a help desk. Do you really think that the other stakeholders are going to say no? She was just hired. You don't say no to someone you just hired, right? She got the budget. The budget is fresh. She's making some changes. You don't hire someone to say no to change, right? You hire someone to make changes, right? Sure. And so technology is much easier. That's why it's a risk, and that's why it's an opportunity. So people change are like a fantastic opportunity that you need to know how to leverage.
I absolutely love this. Like the simplicity is genius in it, in the way you sort of figure out and you go about doing it. And it's something as well we talked about with David Skok on the show. Like this is something they also figured out through his time, like at HubSpot and through his investing as well in various companies. Is like one of the biggest indicators of churn is people leaving, that your champion leaving the company. like as a marketer or as a customer success, like people leaving is often something that you just sort of like deal with and you say, okay, they've churned, but people are going somewhere else. They're not leaving. They're going to a new job. They're starting a new fresh. I really think it's a fantastic bit of advice. So, the other thing then I wanted to ask, like you touched on a little bit earlier, is looking at companies and you want to try and predict churn, you said, and you looked at sort of in an unlucky situation where you've been around for 2 years and you could do some sort of regression analysis and understand what leads to it. But in order to do that, I think more often than not, like teams as well, after 2 years, don't really have that level of sophistication yet. They haven't been in the lucky position where they've implemented maybe the right tracking from day one. What is some of like the first steps you would advise any company when they're thinking about going about tracking their marketing efforts and then further down the funnel? Like, what are some of the key things that they need to be doing almost from day one?
Yeah. So you need to start implementing some kind of tracking. And yes, I know I was at Segment for a year and a half, and so I do, I'd say, push that because I think it's great. But you need to start tracking behavior, right? From day one. You cannot build a good product if you don't understand what people are doing in your product, right? That's the thing. It's just like, imagine like no tracking in your app. It's just as if you had a store, a retail store, right? And you had a blindfold and you're not allowed to look at your customers. You will just find out after the end of the day what you had sold. That's it, right?
Yeah.
It's horrible. You need to track behavior, right? And for anyone who's listening, if your company is less than 2 years old and less than 5 million in revenue, reach out to me and I can give Segment for free to you. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's great. Okay, and that's going to be in most early stage companies. Take that offer and implement tracking, right? No cost.
Powerful tool.
Yes, because it gives you two things. One, it helps you like standardize user behavior data from day one, and two, it lets you also change your stack as you grow. And so you might not want to start with like expensive tools. You might want to start with like cheap tools, which is great, but at least the data is going to stay the same. And you can switch from one tool to the other within the Segment platform. But going back to what you said, start small. Don't go for like, oh, I'm going to track everything in the app, because you're going to get bogged down into the complexity of the project. Start with like, what are the key behaviors, right? What are the key behaviors of people in my app? What are the key lifecycle moments? If you have an app that has like social referral, then you want to track that, right? You want to track when they invite maybe a coworker into the app, or when maybe the admin adds someone. If it's something that is a JavaScript or like a chat, like a Drift, you want to track when the JavaScript is first put on a website and loaded. That's a key moment, right? Yeah. So all of those things you want to start tracking. You can do pretty well with like 10 or 15 key events to start with.
Yeah, and just like you said, really just start small. Really be specific about what you want to track.
Build a tracking plan. Do it in Google Sheets. In Airtable. Just build a tracking plan of like what are the key moments, what's the name of the event, what's the property, and get going.
Yeah, I think the tracking plan is probably the key element in this as well. I think because I've seen this happen. I've made this mistake before. Like in the early days, you get excited, you want to move fast, and you just start adding tracking and a whole bunch of things. But without having a plan in place and not having a place to really record what's being tracked, it very quickly becomes a mess. Like everybody will start adding their own inputs and insights. And
it's 2 years down, it's impossible to leverage because then the data is like crap. So you want a tracking plan. Sheets is great. Airtable is great. Everyone copy paste the same event name and format, naming convention, and that's the way to go.
Solid. Yeah. And then as well, when we think about sort of the marketing and acquisition channels, like we talked about the topic of being able to attribute marketing spend to LTV. Talk us through some of the steps in that, like how could a company go and set this up effectively?
Yeah, well, I mean, in essence, like if you have good tracking, it means you can drop the information of each new paying customer, each new sign up, with the source, the acquisition source channel of that user in a database. And if and when that person converts, you can then join the tables and you can look at the revenue per channel. And then when that person leaves, you can calculate the LTV, or you can do a predictive LTV based on retention. So that's usually what I do. And then I have, so one thing that I look into is a new metric called sales velocity per channel. And then I look at retention. Sales velocity is a measure where you multiply the time to close, sorry, you multiply the average value by the conversion rate, and you divide by the time to close, right? And that's fairly important, especially when you have salespeople, because you don't want to push only like whales, like large deals that sure have a very high ACV, but take very long to close, because then the efficiency of your team goes down, right? So it's the same logic, right? You don't want to acquire customers that are going to churn in the first like year, right? You don't want to acquire customers that are going to require a huge sales effort. So on the top of the funnel, I measure like sales velocity, and on the bottom of the funnel, I measure like retention and LTV, right? And then I bring back those metrics channel by channel and say, hey, like I've got like, for example, an app store channel. And if I look at the app store, well, I'm going to see usually, you know, a pretty good velocity, because even though the conversion is low, the time to close is really, really fast. And so the effort is almost null, right? And I'm usually going to see a pretty high churn. And so I calculate the LTV, and then I look at two metrics and say, hey, like, is it worth to bring them in based on the effort to close them and based on whether they're going to stay or not? And then I calculate my margin, right? Because my margin, if you want to think of like your CAC to LTV, you really got to start thinking of like, what's your fully loaded CAC, which you got to take into account like the humans that are required to make the people pay and to keep the people in, right? If you're not taking that into account, then you're kind of cheating, right? Because if some customers need, if some customers need a lot more help to be successful and to stay, well, that's a cost that exists somewhere in your P&L, right? And that cost needs to be tied to that channel, because maybe you have a very crappy channel because people, you know, have been overpromised to, or have been underexplained. And that's a typical behavior that happens when you, for example, you open a new channel that brings in people who are, I'd say, a bit higher, a bit above, a bit before in the readiness stage. You know, most sales cycles, you know, customers go through like a couple of weeks, a couple of months of like reading some articles about the software, the competitors. They maybe read a white paper, some emails, and so they start understanding like the market, looking at the products right now, right? When you have very fast close, you know, so you have what we call like a one-touch close and like, or an outbound. That's typical of outbound. So outbound, they don't know anything. You have a great sales rep, right? I'm going to say great with quotes around it. And you can see that sales rep closes really well, right? Yeah. There's a high chance that there's a big churn. Why? Because that person is really good at closing people and could sell anything. But those customers do not understand your product. They might not even know your product. They bought something they don't understand, right? And so all of the actual sales needs to happen after the close. And if your organization is not ready for that, they're going to churn. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. It works. You just need to think of like, hey, all of like the typical like demo and sell through and like sales engineers and like answering all the questions will still need to happen if you don't want to churn. Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah. There's a debt somewhere that needs to be paid.
Yeah. I think this is something as well that's often like quite separate from one another. Like you have a sales cost and you have a marketing cost, and they're often thought of together in the context of like, is this channel actually worth it? So I love this like top and bottom approach where you're looking at just not only the cost per acquisition, but on the other side, like LTV and the sales velocity. This is definitely something I think is another level of sophistication really to bring into a marketing team and have a good understanding of what's performing and what's not.
Yeah, and I think, like when we talk about this sophistication, like people wonder like, why bother? Like, why should I, like, that's a lot of effort. I think most people don't realize that in SaaS, unless you have a product that's really unique and is in 10x what others people do, most likely you offer a product that competes with other people. And it is a very competitive market, right? Extremely competitive. And so if you can have, a 30% gain over your competitors on CAC or on retention, or you can close people faster, like you're going to crush them. Because month by month, they're going to be forced to retreat from a channel, right?
Sure.
So, example, imagine that Facebook for SaaS usually doesn't work well, right? And so imagine you find a way to bring in leads from Facebook that are not as aware about the product, but you're able like to bring them in and close them. And you see there's a high churn. Now you have two options, right? Either you stop the experiment or you say, hey, let's look at whether those are the right people or not. Can we change the onboarding for that channel to make them successful? And if you're able to do that, to have a personalized onboarding, like an adapted onboarding for the people from that specific channel, and they become successful and they retain, now you're destroying your competitors because you found a way to make a channel work that they haven't, right? That is the way to do it. And so I don't retreat from a channel as soon as I see churn. I try to understand, is this churn unavoidable because the population on that channel is just not the right population? Or is it just that we need to like onboard and do things differently for that category? And is that something that we can do within the bounds of our margin, right? That's always what I try to do. And so that's what I recommend people doing.
Yeah, I love that as well. You just don't retreat from a channel as soon as you see it, like really trying to unlock that competitive advantage. Because definitely like people coming from different channels, like they're coming with different mindsets, they're coming with different levels of sophistication. And you could be speaking to just a different audience that needs to see a different part of your product.
And what that means is as the marketer, it is your job to make sure that the CS team, the success people, have the information on the acquisition, right? And on the acquisition method and channel. More often than not, they don't have it in their CRM. They don't know where the customer came from. And that's sad, right? That's really sad. And not just thinking like the last touch or the first touch, like the life cycle. It's like, hey, did that person start as an outbound lead? Did he or she like read content? Like what is the level of awareness of that person? All right. And so you need to start thinking like, how do I give that information to my success team, to my onboarding team, for like the life cycle and like the steps that this customer went through, right? Otherwise, they need to go through the entire discovery. They're losing time. Your customer's frustrated, and it's just not a great experience.
Yeah, this is something we talked about with Andres Perd from Outfunnel. He actually built a company now around this, is realizing that like marketing and sales were totally disconnected, and to get ahead of the curve with your sales and success teams, like just giving them that simple context of like what ads people saw and where they came from and what their interests were, like, puts you way ahead of the competition when trying to close deals. So I have another question here for you, G. Like, I want to put you in a hypothetical scenario now as well. And let's pretend you've moved to a new company and you walk in and you see like churn and retention really bad. You've been asked like to try and turn things around for this company. What are some of the things you would do in the first 2 to 3 months to try and help rectify the situation?
Yeah. The first thing is I look at whether there's an NPS score that's in place. So NPS collection. So are we collecting information on current customer satisfaction, right? That's the first thing I would do to understand, like, hey, like, how does that compare with industry standards? If the NPS score is negative, then I already start to have an answer, right? It means the people are unhappy with the product. First thing. Second thing, I'm going to do a very simple campaign, which I've done a lot of time in the past, a text-based email for all the people that have churned in the past 2 months from in the name of the CEO to the champion. And it's not trying to bring them back. It's just saying, hey, Andrew, I realized that it didn't work out. I'm sorry about that. Can you just tell me in one line why you left? Okay. And there's no link, there's no CTA, there's no button, there's no form. Okay. It's very important. It's got to feel personal. It's got to feel. And so very good response rate. And then I use Monkey-Learn to do some text analysis to break that down in categories to understand, did they move to a competitor? Did the company disappear? Was it too expensive? And so on and so on and so on. Right. So I try to understand from people who have left. I try to understand from people who are still here. Right. And then I try to break down. Can I do some simple math around the people that have left and the people who are currently there but unhappy? Can I correlate that with other information? Is it based on channel? Is it based on salesperson? Is it based on company size? Like, what are we doing wrong? Right? Now, there's two things, right? Either I can see a variation. Some part of the population is churning more, is more unhappy. And so it just means that our product isn't great for that part of the population. It could just be like you don't have a great product for people who don't read English, right? That's a typical case. It could be you don't have a great product for large companies, also a typical case, right? If the churn is evenly distributed, so it's noisy, you don't find any signal, then you have a larger issue, right? It means that broadly you are over-promising, right? It means you're bringing people in on promises that people then don't see the value for, right? And then you need to change. You need to either be able to build the features of those promises, or you need to be able to change your acquisition overall. So that's my usual strategy.
Nice. I like it. So that, again, looking from both sides of the problem, like focusing on those that are successful, and then on the opposite end, like those that have left. I really, really like that sort of personalized note as well from coming from the CEO. It definitely, like, it's something I think as well at Hotjar that I realized previously was like when they had a email that goes out if somebody is churned through delinquent churn, credit card failures. And I think often like this is also one of those things like with leaving, you have to take into consideration the user psychology at this point in time, and trying to sort of push them with a form or a button to get a response. It's not going to happen, but making it personal and really having it focused. You spoke about Monkey-Learn as well, and I'm intrigued to learn a little bit more about how you're using it. So I liked you talked about the sentiment and intent analysis. Like maybe talk us through that tool as well. Like how are you using it? In what ways?
Yeah. So Monkey-Learn is a platform for people like me who I'm not an engineer to build some simple machine learning and text analysis, let's say models. And I can connect it to either NPS tools or Zapier or any other kind of tool to like collect the data. And the point is, Monkey-Learn exists because people don't want to fill forms, right? When you send an email and you ask people for their feelings on a link and they need to fill a type form, the engagements could be much lower than if they can just respond from their mobile phone in like one line. Much lower. And so I saw that and I said, hey, like, how can I increase the response rate or the engagement rate? And I stopped completely like asking for structured data from the people. People will just say what they want, and then I use tools to structure the data in broad categories. So I use Monkey-Learn to like structure my NPS automatically, to structure the email responses. I use it also for outbound emails and acquisition. So for example, like we send like thousands of outbound emails per week. A couple of % of people respond. We need to split that in like interested, not interested, wrong person, and we then handle the automation based on that. So we have we generally train a model based on a couple hundred occurrences that we have done manually, and then we have an API that we can hit, and it does the text analysis for us.
Wow, that's super cool. And saves a lot of time as well, man hours for the
Yeah,
team, I guess, in
yeah,
analysis.
yeah. And it enables you to do things that give a much better customer experience than without. Because most of the time, for example, like the reason why people use forms and like structured, and they ask the customer for structured data is because they don't want to bear the costs of like reading each individual email and structuring the data. Okay.
Yeah.
But I thought is like, hey, my customer is king. Why would I ask my customer to do something that I don't want to do?
Yeah. Making them jump
Obviously,
through hoops.
yeah, my customer, like that person has left, is already unhappy. Do you really think that that person is going to spend 5 minutes filling a form? No way. I got to reduce the friction. My entire, like, if you think of like what I do as a head of growth, my job is to reduce friction. I can't add a form, right? And so I got to ask the least effort possible and like use either humans or technology to get the best data possible from the lowest effort. That's the one way to like recap what my job is.
Yeah. It's fascinating, like all these different things that you managed to put together. I think somebody dubbed it, and I think you referred to yourself as well as the mad scientist.
Yes.
Like definitely listening to this chat now already, like I'm sure there must be many, many other crazy ways that you've been able to automate and connect things. So I think maybe if we want to just end it there today and like leave us with maybe one of the craziest things that you've done with automations or being able to connect data that you think that the audience absolutely needs to try it in their business.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to do something that's related both to churn and acquisition. A couple of years ago, I've started buying data from G2 Crowd. So for those who don't know, G2 Crowd is like kind of like a review site for software, kind of like the Yelp of SaaS software. And so you can have a page in a category, and you can like have people leave reviews on your product, right? And the great thing about that is that they actually sell the page views, the intent data, not only on who's coming to your page, which companies are coming to your page, but which companies are going to the page of my competitors in my category or the entire category. So imagine that I'm in the help desk category, and that I am gorgeous, right? I compete with Zendesk. I compete with Customer and Reamaze, right? We're all in the same category. If a company goes to the category to find like the best help desk software, I'm going to know about it. If they go to my competitor, I'm going to know about it. I use that in two ways. Automatically, we pull that data in, we match it with our CRM. If that account does not exist in our CRM, we will outbound in the name of the sales rep based on the number of people from that company that have visited my competitor. We're trying to get in the deal before my competitors know about the deal. That's number one. Number two, if that account exists in my CRM, and if that is a customer, now if I have a customer checking out my competitor on G2 Crowd, I got the churn risk. Somebody is shopping for another tool. And so that automatically goes to my success team and saying, hey, success people, whoever's in charge of that account, you missed something, right? Somebody's shopping here, and we don't like that. So I do that automatically. And I buy the data from G2 Crowd. I buy data from more than 10 other intent sources, who's being hired, who has upvoted who on Product Hunt, and so on and so on and so on. And so we automatically predict future conversions within our market for potential customers and for potential churn.
Oh, that's incredible. It sounds scary as well in some aspects of the word, but I've seen it at play, I think, as well in some of the companies that you worked at. Myself, obviously, shopping around for different tools, and it definitely is effective.
Yeah.
Well,
the last thing I want to leave the audience with, one last thing is, yes, I try a lot of tools, and I am on like lots of small pieces of technology. That is my competitive advantage. Most marketers will use traditional tools, true and proven tools. Example, they're going to be on Marketo, right?
Yeah.
I don't claim to be a better marketer. I can only say one thing. If you give me Marketo and Salesforce, don't expect me to create 10x campaigns, like campaigns that are 10x better than anyone else, right? I only win because I have a competitive advantage of using the newest, smartest tool, piece of technology that gives me competitive edge. That's why I do it.
Yeah.
Right. So I always go to the newest thing. I'm always open to new technologies, and I will try them, and it's going to give me a small edge, maybe for 1 year or two. I'm going to take it.
And take advantage. Yeah, it's super interesting as well. Definitely, you've been able to take advantage of a lot of these new technologies as well. G, for the listeners then as well, like on my behalf, just thanks a lot. It's been fantastic having you. But how can the listeners keep up to date with you? How can they follow you online? Like, let us know.
I think my best channel is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you do want to send me an email at g@growth.li. That's fairly easy. Or just on LinkedIn, Guillaume Cabane. And that's where I am.
Cool. Well, thanks very much. It's been great having you today. And I think obviously like from this episode, there's a lot to take away. So I hope the listeners enjoyed, and we start seeing some companies growing as a result.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, G. And that's a wrap for the show today with me, Andrew Michael. I really hope you enjoyed it and you're able to pull out something valuable for your business. To keep up to date with CHURN.fm and be notified about new episodes, blog posts, and more, subscribe to our mailing list by visiting CHURN.fm. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have any feedback, good or bad, I would love to hear from you. And you can provide your blunt, direct feedback by sending it to andrew@churn.fm. Lastly, but most importantly, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it and leave a review, as it really helps get the word out and grow the community. Thanks again for listening. See you again next week.